have here, this is the first large group that the library has had in this facility, so this is really wonderful. We're so glad you came. This event is a joint venture between the library and the Historical Society, and so between all of us, that's where our goodies have come from for the day. So it's a very, very multiple contribution for us. If any of you need the restrooms, they're out this door, straight out almost to the left out there. So help yourself to that as you need. And I guess I'll turn this over to Janet, let her introduce her day.
Did she say what her name was?
No.
I am Janet Sharp Robinson, Jim Sharp's daughter, and this is Janice Sharp.
Yes.
And related to me, but we're kindred spirits now, aren't we? Janice has been the driving force to get this new building built for a long, long, long time. So yes, we are so proud of the facility and what we can do for the community. And lots of people that are here today aren't from this community at all, so we especially welcome you. Thank you, Janice. And Terry Foster is back in the kitchen helping arrange the cookies so you can have some more later, and she's the business manager here. Thank you so much to the library staff and the library volunteers, which are many. All right. Well, I became a friend of the library several months ago, and we started dreaming about what kinds of educational events we'd have in this building for the community and beyond. And I said, my dad's an author. He's written 3 books. And their eyes got big, like, that would be pretty cool. And so, first of all, we called Dad and asked if he would come to Valley Center and talk about his book, Sergeant of the Guard at Nuremberg, which we're talking about today, and he has a wonderful PowerPoint for you. And he'll talk about his World War II experiences at Nuremberg, working with the defendants, managing the guards and the schedule, and how many people do you know that could tell that story today? Well, we're glad to have Dad here, and I'm going to invite him to come forward, and let's welcome him.
First, I want to make sure that everyone in the back is hearing okay. Is it okay? And if I stray a little bit away, can you still hear?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, thank you, Janet, for that introduction. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. A couple of reasons that I'm happy to be here. One is that at my age, I'm just happy to be most anywhere. And number two, if it enhances in any way the improvement in this facility, which would be hard to do, but if it helps that, I'm happy to make some minor contribution. So thank you for inviting me here today. We're going to get into some pretty heavy subject matter for the next 30 minutes, and we're going to have questions at the end. So I want to get a smile on your face to start. We'll see how it ends up, because some of this is pretty heavy subject matter. But and this is a little joke that some of these teenagers might relate to. It's about this teenage boy who just took his driver's license test and passed. He came home that evening and he confronted his father and said, when can we discuss my use of the family car? And the father said, well, I'll make a deal with you. You bring your grades up from a C to a B, study the family Bible a little bit, and get a haircut, and we'll talk. Well, it was 6 weeks or so before the father said, well, son, you brought your grades up, and I noticed you're studying the family Bible some. But he says, I'm disappointed you haven't got your hair cut. And the son said, well, you know, Dad, I've been thinking about that too. I've studied the Bible, and I've noticed that in my studies of the Bible, that Samson had long hair, John the Baptist had long hair, Moses had long hair, and there's even evidence that Jesus had long hair. And his dad looked at him a minute, and then he said, did you all notice that they walked everywhere they went? Well, we all have to learn a little bit when we're teenagers, so I thought for any teenagers, I know there's some history students here, so I thought I'd pass that on to them. But anyway. I have 20 slides. It takes 20 minutes, and then we'll have about a 20-minute test at the end. But you can, instead of those test questions, you can ask me the question, and we'll see if I flunk or pass. So anyway, could you leave those lights on just for about 4 minutes? Well, World War II was the most destructive war in history. Horrific loss of life. 45 million people died in World War II. Probably some of your fathers, maybe grandfathers were in that war. I know there were, because some of the books I've signed, some of you had mentioned that, so I know that. And everybody was involved. There were 16 million boys and girls, men and women who went off to that war, 16 million. We just dedicated or rededicated the Peace Memorial Auditorium in Manhattan. In Manhattan, Raleigh County, we lost 101 boys in World War II. 101. And that's when Manhattan was about 13,000 population. There was over 2,000 that went off to serve. How did I get involved? Well, a long time ago, I was a farm boy. I had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. Sunday afternoon, December 7th, 1941. How many of you know what that was? Yeah, Pearl Harbor. Five words the radio announcer said, and it caught my attention, and I wondered what it meant. He said, the Japs are bombing Pearl Harbor. That was a little after lunch, December 7th, 1941. Our family had just had lunch, and nobody knew what it meant. Thousands of people volunteered, went to the draft board and volunteered to serve their country. We were going to fight the Nazis. You want to bring up Jandy? What Jandy's bringing up, this is my granddaughter Jandy, is bringing here the Nazi flag, the flag of the Third Reich, Adolf Hitler. On the right-hand side, upper right-hand side, is the cross. That's an iron cross that represented the Nazi Party and the strength of the German people. What really represented the Nazi Party, though, is this Nazi symbol right there in the middle. That is the symbol of the Nazi Party and the Third Reich. Now, of course, thank you, Jandy. That flag is outlawed today, and you got to be pretty careful where you display it, because I've had people ask me to take it down when we had it up very long in a public place. They thought maybe there was neo-Nazis represented there, and it has become that type of symbol. Of course, that flag is outlawed today, but it flew in Nuremberg on more than one occasion when Adolf Hitler was there, and that was a long time ago. The Nazi trial, the Nuremberg trial, ended in November 1945 after 13 months. It was supposed, when I signed on, it was supposed to last 3 months. But it was a full-power international military tribunal, and it seemed like there was squabbling between the Russians, the British, the Americans, and the French from the word go. So it didn't end until almost a year after it started. And I was there 7.5 months, and I didn't think it was ever going to end, and I wanted to get enrolled at K-State, so I left a little bit early. So now we're going to go to the slides and take a look at some slides that tell the story better than if I'm talking about it all the time. So I guess we've got the lights dimmed, haven't we? But anyway, first slide is a slide from about when I was a junior in high school. This is about 1941, when Hitler controlled practically all of Europe. I'd say at least 95%. He controlled or had allies in all these countries. As you can see, the red or the pink is what Hitler controlled. He was the gates of Moscow and Leningrad. He was at the English Channel. He was also across the Mediterranean in North Africa, and he had captured Norway and Denmark, and about 17 other countries were his allies. So this was about when I entered the war. Let's take a look at the next slide. The next part I was actually a part of. It was called the Battle of the Bulge. It took place in Belgium and Luxembourg. The Germans had penetrated our lines. Here to the right you can see the word Germany. The line, black line going through there is the German border. When the Germans attacked in December of 1944, the winter, they penetrated our lines in the yellow for about 30 miles. They captured and knocked out of action thousands of our troops. Germany had these Panzer tanks that would scare you to death. They were better and bigger than any of our tanks. And they broke through our lines. I was in the far corner. I left my pointer, but anyway, far right-hand corner up there at that point, it says 1st Division up there if you can see it. I was not there when they penetrated, but I was a replacement for those who were killed or captured. So, this just gives you an idea of bringing you up to date. Now, let's take a look. The Battle of the Bulge was the coldest winter in the 40 years over there. Now, I was a combat infantryman, and in combat infantry, everything you have is on your back. All you have is a rifle, 100 rounds of ammunition, a bayonet, hand grenades, and a mess kit, and things like that. And you were living in foxholes, and either one you had dug or somebody else had dug, or behind a brush pile or a ditch or anything where you could have protection if you weren't attacked. If you were attacked, then you were advancing forward. Most of the time on tanks. We were armored infantry when we were on tanks, and you had advanced until you received opposition. But there's about 1 million troops involved here, and it was fought, largest battle fought by American forces in World War II. Next slide. Here's another example. This is an example in the Ardennes. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I didn't.
It's the top button there.
Okay. Yeah. It was fought in the Ardennes Forest, which is in Belgium and Luxembourg. And when I went to the battlefield, they issued all of us a white cape because it was snowy, and that give you some protection at a distance. Makes you less visible, of course, to the enemy. That's a tank. It looks like, getting ready to go into attack, there would be 8 or 10 combat infantrymen on those tanks. There would also be some behind the tank for protection. Next, let's see. Okay. This battle lasted 6 weeks. It started December 16th and went until January 26th, 1945. Next. You can see how many, there's 100,000 casualties on each side. There was 18, 19 to 20,000. Really, the numbers are unknown. There was a flux of lack of information from all sides because they'd cut our battle lines and took our food supplies and ammunition in the advance, as you notice. But there's also the number that was killed and wounded. Okay? Now, the wars, I'm advancing here ahead because we have a limited amount of time. But I was with the 1st Infantry Division. We advanced to the Elbe River where we met the Russians, and then we went down into Berchtesgaden where Hitler's hideout was down around in Bavaria near the Czechoslovakia border. That's where we became military police. We were combat infantrymen. But they told us that we needed to hunt down these Nazis that caused this war. And we've now won. Go to their homes and arrest them and bring them in for interrogation. Because we're going to have a trial. They caused this war and we're going to make them pay the consequences. So we arrested hundreds of thousands of Nazis. I never arrested Hermann Göring or Rudolf Hess or any of those guys. But I did go to a lot of homes at midnight and arrest the Nazis that lived there. And most of them, the family didn't want them to go. Of course they did. But we had the weapons and we ordered them to get them ready to go. And we'd put them in a truck with us, take them back to intelligence headquarters who would interrogate them, decide whether they were going to stand trial. And eventually 22 of them stood trial at Nuremberg. I didn't arrest any of those, but somebody did. And I've got the list here. And the reason I was able to do that, if you can back up one step, that's the past we had. I want to mention the reason I was able to write that book and with some degree of clarity was when I went up the gangplank at Boston Harbor, the Red Cross ladies gave us a little booklet here along with candy bars and gum and other things. When 4,000 of us went up the gangplank on that ship, troop ship, Red Cross ladies had this little ditty bag, a drawstring bag. And in that bag was candy and nuts and candy bar and that notebook right there. And a pencil. And I didn't have anything else to do, and the troop ship was packed full. So I got on my bunk and decided, well, maybe I'll write something about what I've been doing, because I just graduated from infantry training, getting ready to go overseas. And anyway, I did that, and I wasn't supposed to. It's against military rules. In case they killed or captured you and found the book in your body. But I didn't write anything that would cause any problems. Well, I wanted to know where I'd been. Well, I kept that book my kids got into it and started asking questions about it. You can't read it all today. Spade it out. So I thought, well, maybe I should write something down. So I did. I started writing. And anyway, I wrote a book about the diary of a combat infantryman. Black settlers on a Kaw Indian reservation, which I wrote for my Morris County Historical Society, because nobody knew why these black settlers come down there after the Civil War. And then I wrote the book on Nuremberg. So that's the uniform we wore when we're in public view. You've seen, no doubt many of you have seen documentaries on the Nuremberg trial. If you were in public view, you had the white helmet, gloves, chaps, and belt, and a .45 caliber pistol. Good. If we can get that to stay there. Yeah, I'm sure that's better. Okay. So, in a .45 caliber pistol with 9 rounds of ammunition, you use it if anybody tried to escape, and there was a lot of rumors that the SS or the Hitler Youth were going to come and recapture these guys and start the Fourth Reich. Okay. This is called the Palace of Justice. If you ever go to Nuremberg nowadays, you want to be sure to go there because this is where the trial was held. You can see some of the guardhouses out in front that are striped. They're all around that building. And it was highly secured. At every stairway, there was a machine gun with sandbag at every stairway there, and there's tanks all around that building as well. Okay? Nuremberg was heavily bombed. You can see that here. There was an 800 plane bombing raid, January 2nd, 1945. Half of them had 500-pound bombs, and 500 of them incendiary bombs. These buildings are skeletons. That's the way Nuremberg was when I was there. They were burnt out. All that's standing is the sidewalls. Most of those buildings are 4 and 5 stories. The incendiary bomb goes down to the basement, goes through 5, 6, 7, 8 stories, sets a fire on every floor. So there was not much left in Nuremberg when I was there. Now, let's see, can we go back to the previous one? Is that it? Okay. All right, let's go forward one. Yeah. This is the cell block itself, where the 22 Nazis, there was hundreds of Nazis in the prison, and I'll show you a wider expanse of the prison in just a minute. But on this floor, there were 3 sergeants of the guard. If I was on guard here, I could have been clear at the end. There's a sergeant of the guard down there. You can see who has a white belt. Then right here in the middle, there's the white belted sergeant of the guard. There would be another clear up here as well. So it was highly secure. Each one of those guards was supposed to be in contact with his eyes with every one of those 22 prisoners. And they were. I don't care whether they're going to the bathroom or they're sleeping or what they're doing. Well, this wasn't secure enough because we lost several, and we'll go into some detail maybe later if we have time. Okay. This is the interior where the judges sat. There are 2 judges on trial there, 2 for the Russians, 2 for the American, 2 for the English, and 2 for the French. They're the ones that make the decision. They're sitting, the Russians are the first 2 on the left, on your left, and then the next 2 those are the English, and then Americans, and then the French. These are attorneys. You'll see more of them in the next slide. Okay. Our prosecuting attorney was Justice Jackson, who eventually became Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. He was great. He was an excellent orator, and he and Herman Goring would really have legal battles go in that courtroom. Herman Goring had a bombastic voice, was a great orator, and a great lawyer. And he held his ground with all of our lawyers. But we set the rules for the trial, and when they followed the rules that we set, we won the war, they lost, and we made judgment at Nuremberg. This is the interior look. My job, usually a sergeant of the guard, could be posted anywhere. We could be on the outside area, establishing security. We could be in the courtroom like this is right here, or we could be in the cell block like I showed you a while ago. And there's one other area that was subject to the officer of the day, depending on what security problems we thought, where we would be assigned. Now, I mentioned Hermann Göring. He was probably the most colorful man there. He was leader of the German Air Force. He was number 2 to Adolf Hitler, and was sentenced to hang at the gallows. He didn't. He sent a note to the judges, and he told them in a memo, and it's in my book in case you want to see it in more detail. But in essence, what he told the judges, that he was not going to be, could not be allowed to be prosecuted and hung at the end of a rope. That was not dignified death. He would agree to be shot with a rifle like his soldiers were, but he would not agree to be hanged at the gallows. Well, the judges thought, well, we got control of this situation. You can't control this situation. So they kind of ignored his plea and turned it down. Well, Herman committed suicide on his own just 3 hours before he was scheduled to go to the gallows. And I'm not going to get into detail right now. If we have time afterwards in the question and answer, I'll tell you what really happened there. But let's get through the slides first. Now, one of the most mysterious things that happened in 1941 was Rudolf Hess, here with Adolf Hitler. Hess is here on the right. In 1941, May of 1941, he was a pilot. I mean, he was number 2 man to Adolf Hitler at the time, but he was a practicing pilot. And I believe it was from Augsburg, Germany. He went to the German flight aircraft, checked out a fighter plane, I believe it was a Messerschmitt, and he flew to Scotland in May of 1941, and he bailed out. He floated down on this farmer's field, and he announced his name was Albert Horn, but he wanted to see the Duke of Hamilton. Well, turns out this was Albert Hess, or Rudolf Hess, and it wasn't Albert Horn, it was Rudolf Hess. Anyway, there's also a long story there. He wanted, the essence of the trip was, he could see that Germany was going to be in trouble because they were going to be fighting a 2-front war. He wanted the Western powers to agree to a peace treaty. And then all the German would join the American and the English, and we'd all go fight the Russians. They hated the Russians, and the Russians hated them. Well, that did not happen, but nobody knew what really happened. Scotland Yard kept it pretty secret what Rudolf Hess was up to. Nobody knew anything about it or why it happened until after the war. And of course, the Russians were unhappy that we wouldn't share what we knew about it or what Scotland Yard knew. That's a mystery that wasn't solved till after the war. Well, here's another one of the 22, and I've just selected 6 or 7. Alfred Jodl was chief of staff, German Army, excellent soldier. Eventually, he was communicate well in English. All of these people were highly educated. They all had at least 1 college degree and maybe 2 or 3. Every one of them could speak 2 or 3 different languages. So when you, the way and this is a question that I'll probably answer instead of wait till the end. People say, well, how were you able to get these autographs and why did you want them? Well, number one, when I told my folks what I was doing, they found it kind of hard to believe that I was in charge of these Nazis, and my high school classmates said, oh, hell, that's just a story. They didn't believe it either. So I said, well, and my mom wrote me that. And so I thought, well, the only way I can prove it probably is to get an autograph or two of these. So I did. I got about, I think, 7 or 8 of them, and they're in my book in case you're interested further. But anyway, that's a signature up there of Alfred Yodel. And the reason I was able to do this, as a sergeant of the guard, you had some authority, you know, at the lower levels. And we would accompany these Nazis to their attorney, where they would go, it'd be more quiet. They didn't do that in their cell. And accompanying to their doctor or wherever they needed to go, we had to supply guard duty for all of them. But anyway, well, a lot of times, we weren't supposed to talk to these people first. But after a while, if you're taking somebody to wherever, and you're sitting in the same room right next to them or standing there, you don't just stand and look at each other. They'll ask you questions. Herman Goring was especially inquisitive about, how long I'd been in the Army and whether I had any brothers or sisters. And I found out about him and his wife. And you can get to feeling sorry for these people when they find out that half their kids have been killed in the war or lost in a submarine or something, They suffered way worse than anybody else. But they were our enemies at the time, and we were taught to hate the enemy. You can't be a combat infantryman if you don't hate the enemy. He signed the peace treaty with Eisenhower at the end of the war. Now, Now here's a guy, Heinrich Himmler, is probably next to Hitler. Maybe not on the official standard procedure level of authority, but he was second in command off the chart of command. He was, because he controlled the SS, which is the supreme best soldiers probably in World War II. They were good soldiers. He commanded them. The SS soldiers were what we found out were the studs and the model for the Aryan super race. They were young, like 20, 22, 23, 6 foot, 190 pounds, blonde, blue eyes, didn't have what they considered any bad blood in their family line back for 3 generations. Now, what they considered bad blood was like Jews, Russians, Slavs, gypsies, handicaps, and people of that. They were getting rid of what they considered the bad blood, and these SS troops and women of similar characteristics were producing the more intellectuals, and eventually they were going to have, in his 1,000-year Reich, we're going to have a super race. Well, it didn't happen, but you've probably seen some of these documentaries like Hitler's Children. It was a study and research that we didn't know anything about. This guy committed suicide before he got to the trial. I want to say one more thing about that. He introduced the Aryan supremacy, because, using his studs and models of the SS troops, and he introduced the Nuremberg laws, which prevented a male and a female from having sexual relations if one was a Jew. That was what the Nuremberg laws were all about. And a woman under 45 years of age could not work in a German household as a housekeeper. And there were other parts of the Nuremberg laws. You've heard of them, but that's just 2 parts of probably the most effective ones. And you've seen movies about that as well. Okay. 11 months later, trial is over. Final judgment has been issued, and this, everybody assumed, would close the chapter on World War II. Well, 11 were hanged, or 11 were charged to be hanged. 3 were acquitted, 3 received life and 4 received 20 years. Now, many of those, after the Germans, you see, we occupied Germany for years. We had a military government in every town in Germany. As soon as the infantry captured it, they brought military government in. Well, we had troops there for I don't know how, and so we influenced whoever was in charge of the German government because we were providing the Marshall Plan and giving them money to rebuild. They would not get rebuild otherwise. So anyway, after the Germans got some control, you know, you can, if you think about it, we turned the trials over to the Germans. That means that the German civilians were trying the German soldiers who fought for their country. And if you think about it, well, if that happened here, you know, and people conquered us, would they do the same thing to would I have been on trial, for example, or my commanders, and the president, and the Congress, and the leaders? Just a question. It made me wonder, you know, about this. So a lot of those people that were sentenced, when the Germans got control, they shortened the sentence or released them. Rudolf Hess was the last of the 22. He was moved to the prison in Berlin, and he died at 96 years old. He was the last of the Nazis to die. Last 1,000-year life lasted just 12 years. And German people after the war, they really loved Adolf Hitler. That may sound strange to you, but they did. They thought he'd, you know, my washerwoman, and I had a washerwoman right there in Nuremberg because you didn't have any other way to get your clothes washed after the war. She lost her husband and 2 sons, one on the Russian front and one in the Battle of the Bulge, and she was a dyed-in-the-wool Nazi. She really told me about and had a few photos dug out from the rubble that showed how Adolf Hitler had put people back to work. He built the Autobahn. His kids were Hitler Youth, and they were studying. In fact, some of those the Hitler Youth man that was in trial, von Calderon, was asking me questions one time. And I wanted to know if I was in the Boy Scouts, which I was. Well, did you have rifle range practice in the Boy Scouts? Yeah. Did you camp out? Yeah. Did you go on patrol, do orientation? Yeah. Well, he was relating, our Boy Scouts, believe it or not, to the German Hitler Youth. They went out and planted trees and things like that, built parks, cleaned up roadways, all those things. So it depends on, you know, what facts do you really have to make decisions on, not only then, but today. It's even worse. But anyway. So the war's over. I was home before they hung these guys. I signed up for 3 months. They said the trial's going to be over in 3 months. Well, and you get to arguing with the Russians and the French and all those others about what you're going to be doing here. It wasn't over. They extended, kept staying, and I said, I'm going to get out of here. So I wasn't there, and I was glad I didn't when Hermann Göring committed suicide, because that was a great embarrassment to us. We'd had all these guys in prison for 11 months, and now here are 2 or 3 or 4 of them, including Hermann Göring, committed suicide before we got to put him in the gallows. Anyway, the war's over. I'm back home, and I still get, until about 4 or 5 years ago, I was getting letters from some of these fellow guards, but I don't know whether there's any of them out there anymore or not. But anyway, that concludes my presentation from my perspective, but I hope there's some questions. I want to talk about the questions you want to talk about. I could go on for another hour or two, but I'm not going to do that. We've been here already about 40 minutes. That's more than I intended. So let's go to some questions. I bet there's some questions out there somewhere.
So how did Goring commit suicide?
Well, okay, that's pretty. I'll try to. What's the question? How did Hermann Goring commit suicide? The reason I know is I know one of the guards was still there. And here's what he said happened, and I believe it. The United States Army said he had these capsules in his body cavities. I don't believe that. But they had to cover, what happened, because you're in charge here, we can't let this happen. But anyway, make a long story short, Harvey Lee Herspring, he was a guard from California. He was there when I left. I knew him, posted him. He was watching a Nuremberg documentary with his daughter. His wife had died. And his daughter said, after it was over, there was discussion, his daughter said, I can't figure out why they didn't know how he got those capsules. And Harvey Lee had never said this before, but he said to his daughter, well, I know how he got them. Well, he says, you need to tell the local paper so everybody knows and have the history straightened out. He told her that he had this Fraulein, girlfriend. And she told Harvey that Hermann Goring was not getting the proper medication from the American doctors and wondered if he would take him some medication in a ballpoint pen and give it to him. Well, Harvey did, to make a long story short. And an hour before he was to be the first one executed, there was groaning in his cell. He was on his bed. They called the sergeant of the guard. I wasn't there, thank goodness. Officer of the day, and before they got there, he was gone. He'd had capsules, and it wasn't, I don't think it was anything he'd kept in his body cavities for 9 months. But that's what the Army said. I'm not arguing with them, I'm just telling you what I think. So, there was another question back there in the back?
That was my question.
Okay. No questions out of order? Yes.
How many were finally hanged?
There were 11, let's see.
So they were sentenced to hang and then they did hang.
Yeah.
And so the three that were sentenced to life, they were let out.
Most of them the German courts reduced their,
Pretty significant.
yes, it was.
And there was no, after that, they just went on with their lives in Germany.
Well, some of them wrote a book about it. I believe the submarine commander, I think, Donitz. He was the number one. Well, he became Hitler's designate when Hitler committed suicide. He was a submarine commander, and he was the one that I had talked to, and he had 2 boys in the submarine command, under his command, and both of them, their subs were lost, and he didn't know where. We sunk them somewhere out in the Atlantic, I guess. And you get thinking about that. That's pretty tough. He got off. He wouldn't hang. He got out, and the reason I mention that is I think he wrote a book or two, and several of these people did. Albert Speer especially wrote a book that was very interesting. Yes.
Were you chosen to go to Nuremberg, or did you volunteer to do that? And how old were you?
Was I chosen to go to Nuremberg, or did I volunteer to do that? Well, here's how that happened. Right after the war was over, at one of our retreats, my company commander, Captain Miller, announced that there going to be a trial of these Nazis. Furthermore, that those who couldn't have enough points to go home and had seen combat, they wanted somebody to fought against these guys, you know. There was going to be a selection of guards to be at Nuremberg, and they were starting with NCOs, non-commissioned officers, and they were going to build the staff up accordingly. Well, anyway, he suggested 2 of us in his company that he would recommend, and I was one of them, and I didn't have enough points to go home then, and I liked history. I was kind of a minor history buff, and I liked history, so I said, well, I'd do that, and I told him, and he wrote a recommendation and sent it in, and pretty soon I got a letter that said we're going to start interviewing folks, and there's a board of officers to do that. You needed to know something about how you treat prisoners of war. You need to know something about the Geneva Conventions. You had to be a combat soldier that had fought the enemy. And there was, you know, another requirement or 2, and I fulfilled all of them and went to the board, and I was selected. And I was glad I did, because I was only in the Army a little over 2.5 years, but I got a good education in there about, you know, teamwork and discipline, and faith and time management, and family. And so I was selected, and I was glad. The combat of an infantryman is legalized violence, I suppose most of you may know. Whatever that, however you decide that, that's what goes on in the front line. But I'm glad I went through it, but I wouldn't take $1 million to go there again. But it's been a wonderful experience. And are there other questions? Yes. How old? Well, when I first, let's see, I was 19. I was a farm boy. I guess I didn't tell you about this, but anyway, I probably talked too long, but I'm going to tell you this anyway. I had 2 older brothers. They were already in the service. So when I went to the draft board, when I turned 18, I was just going in the Army like everybody else was. All my buddies were going. And I got there and they said, no, we're going to kick you. He said, we need you on the farm to produce food for the civilians and the military. So I didn't know whether I wanted to do that. All my buddies were already gone. But I said, well, if you wanted to do what your country wanted to do then, I'm not saying that's the way it is now, but that's the way it was then. So I said, well, okay. So I took that deferment. It was a year deferment. Well, when you're on a farm, you're out there in the field by yourself, and you're going around and around this field. You got a lot of time to think. And my buddies, the parents that lived in my neighborhood, they were getting notices from the War Department that my buddies had been killed or wounded or captured. And I told my dad, I said, I don't want this anymore. He said, well, he had a business in Harrington. He says, if you don't want to stay here, farm, we're going to have a farm sale. Cattle, hogs, machinery, and we did. Well, that would have been in February of 1944. We had the farm sale. My birthday would turn 20 in April, I guess. But anyway, so I went off to the service, and I would have been 20 years old when I went off. By the time the war was over, I'd been 22, which I believe is your question. Okay, yes?
Did the prisoners speak English with you? And also, did you start to see them as regular human beings?
Yeah, that's a good question. And these people were highly educated. They were highly educated people. They all had degrees. They all could speak English. I could speak about the only English or the German that I knew is what my platoon sergeant taught me when I went to the front lines at night in the Battle of the Bulge. He said, you guys speak any, I was with another buddy, you guys speak any German? Well, I didn't know. And he said, well, there's 6 words you need to learn up here at the front line. And he said, those words are, I'll never forget them. Come Sie here mit Handy Ho. That means, come here with your hands over your head. And he said, these might get you shot, or they might get you some prisoners of war. And it both happened. So let's see.
And how did you see them as people? I mean,
Well, you know, when you take basic infantry training, you learn to hate everything they tell you about them. They did an awful lot of bad things. Not that we didn't, but we didn't lose the war. So, to start with, they were the enemy. First month or two. But after a while, and you got talking about them, and like I mentioned a while ago, they're asking you questions. You're not supposed to do this, but, you know, we did. That's what happens eventually. You start to see them as what they are. Like Donuts lost 2 sons in a submarine. Who can't feel sorry for a father like that? The only kids, they were fighting for his country. And then now here he is on trial for standing up for his country. There was another question back here.
In your private conversations, did anyone ever recognize their role with the crimes against humanity?
Well, the standard answer to that for those guys was this. This is the orders I received from my superior. So yeah, I did it, but it wasn't my fault. I just followed the orders.
Can I rephrase that question a little bit?
Go ahead.
Did you have any idea what was going on with the Polish people, the Russian Jews, while you were there?
No, I tell you, when you're on the front line, you don't have a radio or a newspaper. You only know what's going on around your foxhole. There's a foxhole 50 yards down there, and you better know what's going on up in front and anywhere between you and them. No, we did not know. I didn't know anything about what was going on with the Polish or the Jews. Now, I helped capture a concentration camp at I can't tell you right now, but it was a concentration camp that you haven't probably heard of, and I could see what was going on in there because the people were emancipated, streaming out of there, they're hungry, and the Germans were leaving. They wanted to get out of there, of course, and they did. And you could see then that there was a lot of things going on that you didn't know about. And I'm not saying they were starving, those people who were in there. The Germans didn't, at the end of the war, everything was destroyed, everything. I mean, I've never seen such destruction in my life, and I hope I don't see it again. But they didn't have any food, and they didn't have any food to give the prisoners of war either. So,
I would imagine there was a lot of tension around the trial. You talked about the fear that some Nazis or young Nazis would try to free them, but I would think, could you talk about whether there were also protesters or people that wanted to kill them because of what they had done? Or were you ever in frightening situations because of them?
well, there was a lot of German activity that they blamed on the SS and the Hitler Youth, stringing cables across the road about Jeep high. And there were no lights early on. It was terrible. But anyway, there was a lot of subversive activity going on. Yeah, I was in most of the time inside the prison walls, But there were other people that I talked to that would tell you about, you know, there were Germans that would, you know, they didn't want us there. We lost it. We won the war, but they didn't want us there. And there wasn't much they can do about it.
I can't remember the guy's name, but in the book Auschwitz, the commander of Auschwitz, he contended all through this and even being led up to the gallows that I was a soldier following orders, and so what do I do? Not obey orders and get killed earlier, or why am I here? I was just a soldier. Do you recall the ones that were on trial? Because I can understand the generals being there, what the lowest ranking person was in the Nazi party that was on trial in Nuremberg?
Well, I guess probably it was Werner von Kaltenberg, who was the Hitler youth leader. Now, and he was an SS troop, but I'm not sure that I know the answer to your question. Do you got any idea who it might have been?
No, I don't. I just, you know, it's kind of one of those things, you know, you can understand the ones at the top being there under trial, but again, as terrible as what that commander did at Auschwitz, again, he was a soldier following orders. And I just wondered how many were in the predicament that he was in. I mean, I'm not trying to defend him by any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
We were all soldiers at one time or another, and you know about following what you're told to do.
Well, and how far are you going to let that go? You know, everybody has an excuse of why they did this. So I don't know whether there's an answer to your question. I don't.
Well, I was just wondering where, you know, in this, as they were determining who would go on trial and who didn't, how far down the food chain they said, no, these guys were following orders, where these guys had had some responsibility there. That's all I was trying to find out.
I don't know whether it helps answer that question or not, but I think that every one of these guys who were on trial, the 22 originally started, I think they had connections to either a member of the Reichstag or a part of it, which is kind of Hitler's cabinet, you know.
Right.
So that may have been the dividing line. Well, and the reason 3 of those got acquitted was the very reason you're asking about, because we didn't know it. The news didn't publish the fact that Hitler got rid of. So the last 2 years of the war, they got out and been executed, I think, because Hitler got rid of them. So that was another.
Were there any certain Nazi party members you were targeting that you hear the conspiracy theories where they defected to South America or Argentina? Was there anyone that was on trial you heard from, hey, so-and-so defected?
Yeah, one of those was Martin Bormann, who was Hitler's right-hand man at all times. And nobody knows whatever happened. He was on trial, and we convicted him to be hanged, but nobody's ever found him. Now, was it Julius Eichmann who escaped to Argentina or somewhere down there? The Jews found him and put him on. The Jewish found him and put him on trial. And there was at least 1 or 2 others that were on trial that were tried in absentia and convicted, but of course we never found them. They probably died in the rubble of Berlin. Like when I was at Nuremberg, there were 5,000 people dead under the rubble at Nuremberg. And the families would they didn't have anything else, so they'd cut boughs off a cedar tree, make a bow on it, put the name, so whenever people removed the rubble and they took it outside of Nuremberg, they'd tell me, and made ski slopes for the kids, they found out who was under there. So anyway.
I have a question for you. On the defendants, did any of them ever speak to you about Hitler in any interactions they personally had with Hitler?
You know, I've never thought of that question, but The answer is no. No one ever talked about Hitler. Not any of those, well, I'm not saying that. They didn't talk to me about it. They didn't mention him, except to say, that's what Hitler wanted us to do, you know. Most of those people, well, Speer, he kind of turned, he's the first one that turned the tables and started admitting about some of these things the Germans had done. And he wrote about it. But there was another question over here.
I was pointing to her.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yes?
I really don't have a question, but I would like to personally thank you for your service, because men like you, they cause us to learn about today.
Thank you. Thank you.
I didn't say too much about my father's other books, so I can't let you leave without hearing about that. He talked about his little notepad that he kept notes on, and that was the material that launched the book, Diary of a Combat Infantryman, and that was the first war book, and then of course this Nuremberg was his second war book. But also, he wrote a book called Black Settlers on the Kaw Indian Reservation. And most people don't know that at the time the slaves were freed, they needed places to put them, honestly, because the South was hostile and they needed a place to work and feed their families. And so they were sent all around the country, but a lot of them came to the Kaw Indian Reservation because the Indians were moved from their original territorial land. It's a very sad story. So anyway, the black settlers came. You can imagine that they weren't that welcome. They were in the way. They were brought there to farm and, like I say, feed their families. And so that's the book, Black Settlers on the Kaw Infantry. Black Settlers on the Kaw Reservation. I'm sorry. Okay, I just got off the plane last night. I'm not all here.
You might continue on that about your next program.
Yes, that's what I'm leading to now. Pauline, where are you? Okay, come up here. Come all the way up here. Pauline is a Kaw Indian, and she has been researching and studying her family history. And Pauline's grandmother was the first woman chief of the Kaw Indians. I bet you didn't know that. And her story is coming to us right here to this podium in January. There's papers out on the table where you were looking at the books. She'll be our second educational program since this library has been built. And she does a one-person first-person performance of her grandmother and her story. So I hope you'll mark that in your minds. Pauline, can you remember the date?
January 20th.
Thank you. I didn't bring that in with me, sorry. Anyway, she'll be right here in the clothing that her great-grandmother would have worn at that time as she was leaving Oklahoma. Is that right? Am I saying?
Leaving Kansas to go to
Yeah, and so she hasn't written a book, but she does a great performance. It's really spellbinding. So watch the Valley Center paper, and we'll put it up on Facebook and other ways. We'd love to have you come back again for another good program. Thank you for doing the program. We kept you all here later than we expected, but you had a lot of questions, and we really appreciate your interest today. Thank you. Dad will still be out there signing books and selling books. If any of those 3 books are interesting to you, just come back as soon as you can. Thank you.